important, and a lot of people don't realize, is that, we talk about hydration. Most people that I've spoken to, when you hear hydration, they think about how much water they're drinking, but they don't realize that hydration really is most important inside the cells, and water can't get in there unless you have the proper electrolyte balance. That's why supplying the right electrolytes along with your water is paramount to getting that water where it belongs, again, inside the cell, so that cell can function. So those main things, and you can do it with, normal mineral salt, sea salt, to add it to your water every day, first thing in the morning.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive with Cate podcast. I'm here with Dr. David Lipman, and his site is physicalevidencechiropractic.com. Dr. Lipman was a chiropractic physician for many years, and recently he's been really getting into biometrics with people and how to look at really specific micronutrient testing. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into methylation detoxification and looking at how you can actually add and avoid micronutrients to understand how you can feel a lot better, a lot faster. So welcome to the show, Dr. Lipman.
Thank you, Cate. Thank you so much for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so why don't we just jump right in? Let's just jump right in around testing, because a lot of what we've seen in the advances of people taking health into their own hands is being able to do these tests, or they send away for kits and they do tests, whether it's on microbiome or specific nutrient absorption. Tell us a little bit about like your pathway into this part of holistic medicine.
So I've been interested in wellness, I guess we can call it that, since I'm about 10 years old. And it really started from just being exposed to the fact that exercise can make you stronger. And if you're not eating Captain Crunch and Pop-Tarts and Wonder Bread, and you eat real food that we, have survived on for centuries, we could also help to build that body's strength. And over time, and as technology has come out where we can understand and drill down to an individual to see what their specific needs are, which we really couldn't do too more recently, that really intrigued me, because I always kind of knew inherently that you can't just throw every supplement at everybody. We all have our vitamin and mineral and other nutrient needs, but I just knew that you couldn't not everybody can take just everything. So now that a lot of this testing is available, we're able to drill down more individual to see how, from a genetic standpoint, somebody has the ability to process the raw materials, which are nutrients, from either the food they eat or the supplements, and understanding that can give somebody a lot of empowerment to actually guide their biochemistry in a way that they couldn't do previously, to optimize hormonal function, to optimize serotonin and all the neurotransmitter levels, to optimize gut motility and gut health, actually. So all these things, once you understand how your body works, which is, again, as you point out, very easy by getting some testing, it gives you a much better empowerment to self-care instead of healthcare, because as you know, healthcare just doesn't work. We must become our own physicians of a sort, and we can't do that without education. So I'm really big on the things I've learned and sharing them with my patients and the people that are interested in trying to learn these things about themselves and run with it for their own lives.
Yeah. And so what are the kind of tests that that you guys are offering? And I'm also curious, like, what are the tests that people are coming and asking for right now?
Yeah, so the first thing we always do, and we're actually doing with some children, because the methylation, which is this genetic pathway of how all our nutrients are processed by our cells. So it's affecting every organ system. This methylation pathway is how we can take the nutrients. As an example, when you eat an orange, everyone knows you get vitamin C from oranges. You don't just automatically get vitamin C. We have to take that raw form of the nutrient and convert it by a process called methylation. It's just a molecule that our body's attached to it. And then thereby we can put it in this process that ends up utilizing it in all the cells of our body to make whatever needs to be made. And so once you identify that, it'll really affect the nutrition that you need, especially if you've inherited a variant from either your mom or your dad, or if you've even inherited a variant from both parents. Each variant you get reduces your ability to make those conversions. So you're not, number one, you're not converting the things into the usable form so you can become deficient. And the second thing is, if you're not converting it, you might be building up toxic levels of the nutrient in its raw form that you can't use, and you don't want to have it in those higher levels. They're supposed to be converted to the usable form. So you're kind of getting both ends of it. You're helping to reduce toxicity, but then also being able to know exactly what nutritional form or nutrient form your body needs in order to make these conversions to make what we need to, function normally. That's the first thing. We only have to do that test once because it's genetics. You're born with these genes, you're going to die with them. That'll never change. But what we've coupled with this, and we found it to be very effective, is looking not in the bloodstream or the serum at what vitamin and mineral levels are, because usually medical doctors will send you, say, oh, your magnesium's here, your potassium's here, your vitamin D levels here. But the thing is, we're only really looking at like the last 72 hours of our life when we look at the blood. The blood is not where these nutrients are doing the job. The job is done inside the cell. So we look intracellularly to see about the last 6 months of what our nutrient efficiencies or deficiencies are. So now, armed with that, and then knowing your genetic ability to methylate, you can create a custom plan in both your food and your supplementation to support either the variance on your methylation and the actual inefficiencies in your cell. And by doing that, you're really giving your body what it needs to make the things it needs to make to function normally. So many people suffer from symptoms, even like anxiety, depression, insomnia, ADD, OCD, hyper focusing and worrying. All those things really come about because we're simply not getting the nutrients we need to make the things we need to be, more homeostatic, let's say. So that's kind of the approach, and it's been super effective for so many people for the last 4 or 5 years that we've been doing it.
And so what are the tests actually called?
So methylation is called a methyl detox profile. Again, that's the genetic test looking at if your these genetic enzymes are working, properly, or if there's, some variation from one parent, or if it's greatly diminished by 2 parents. So that's a methylation detox profile. We're looking at the micronutrients or inside the cell with something called a cellular nutrition assay or a cellular micronutrient assay. So again, we're looking down inside the cell to see this nutritional content. It's very interesting how they do it. What they'll do is they'll expose a white blood cell to a particular nutrient, let's say, vitamin B12. And when that vitamin B12 is exposed to that cell, if that cell has plenty in it, it's really not going to show any kind of activity. So that indicates that there's plenty in the cell, there's no reaction. However, if the cell is deficient, it's going to have some kind of grafted response, and a mild, moderate, or a heavy duty response, which basically says there's not enough of that nutrient inside that cell. So that's how they create that testing. But that's looking, again, intracellularly at the nutrients, but that's basically how it works. They're looking at exposures of the nutrients and seeing what the cell's reaction is, which is how they derive, the efficiency or inefficiency of those things. Just to throw out there too, Cate, we have something that more and more people have been doing these days, which is food sensitivity testing, because over the last, probably 10 years, they realized that many of us, because of leaky gut syndrome, are sensitive to some of the quote unquote clean foods we're eating, like salmon or broccoli or whatever it might be, that seemingly is healthy food. But in some cases, people that have leaky gut have undigested pieces of these, proteins or nutrients from food get into the bloodstream, and they're not supposed to be in the bloodstream. So when our immune system sees them, they think it's an attack. So it really revs up our immune system to not just be, going after viruses and bacteria, which is what it's made to do, but actually food particles. And that really overwhelms it, causing inflammation in various parts of the body. But not even just to be bloated in your gut, let's say, when you eat them, you can cause, cardiovascular issues, type 2 diabetes, and even metabolic issues, because at the cellular level, you're getting so much inflammation because of the body's own immune system attacking these things because they're going after food particles that don't belong there. So when you identify these foods that you're sensitive to and you remove them, it takes about 6 months to desensitize the body, but it's amazing how much different you can feel, and quickly so, if you're willing to be compliant with these results. So those 3 things are things we tend to run concurrently with a lot of people because it's very impactful when they have that information and they comply with the results.
And so how are the cells harvested to run against the
simple blood test? They're taking blood and they analyze it in lab. Again, They're looking at the genetic portion of some cell structures to see again what the methylation process is doing or it's not doing.
And that's mostly on the red blood cells?
White blood cells for the micronutrient test, because white blood cells tend to hold on to the nutrients for a longer time. So that's why they use them. So they're more predictable, like for the last 6 months of what that cell's been doing, from a nutritional efficiency or deficiency standpoint. And the methylation is really a genetic test. You could actually use a cheek swab and just use, cheek cells because it's more on the cell level that they're looking at the genetics. But they're looking at blood predominantly for this and the food sensitivities too. And they're testing the white blood cells reaction to each food that they expose that to. So it could be a mild reaction, a moderate reaction, or a severe reaction, which means that you're, very sensitive. And if there's no reaction, that's part of your safe list.
So how do like vaccinations and medications show up then? I mean, we're talking a lot about like really specific nutrient protocols, but we also know that a lot of vaccines and pharmaceuticals have side effects. So how do those show up in these tests?
So they're not testing specifically for those things. They're really testing for the body's ability to, again, process nutrient through methylation or what nutrient content is inside the cell. Now, that being said, one of the things that happened as a result of COVID, because the COVID virus will attack the cell membrane, which will affect the cell's ability to either bring nutrients in from the bloodstream into the cell or keep them in there and keep them from dumping out. So one of the things that they've seen since COVID that they hadn't seen prior is that the amount of inefficiencies and efficiencies have really sort of, increased. Well, the amount of inefficiencies have increased compared to what they used to do because they had been doing this prior to COVID. So they're able to see the downline effects of this cell membrane, irritant and some damage that's done in the cell's ability to bring nutrients in. So as an example, a typical person that was on a fairly decent diet might have maybe 3 or 4 inefficiencies where everything else is, sort of status quo. Since COVID, they've seen people have as much as 10 to 15 inefficiencies, especially those who have had pretty, significant effects from COVID, whether during the time they were sick or even long-term COVID symptoms. So that's one of the things they've seen happen, again, resulting from how COVID attacks the cell, and they're seeing it in the efficiencies of the nutrition in the cell. So that's really, they could see the evidence of it, but they're not testing specifically with these tests for COVID or viruses or vaccine issues as a result.
I'm curious about that. So is there a difference in the groups then between those that were vaccinated and unvaccinated in the effects of COVID? So is there a way to tell whether it was actually caused by the vaccine or the virus?
So they haven't developed the ability to do that. All they see anecdotally is that there's definitely a difference from people that have had it, meaning the COVID, and those that had the vaccine. They're seeing more inflammatory things happen because of how spike proteins seem to affect our immune systems and how our immune systems are responding to it. So they don't, again, this particular lab is more focused on the nutrient aspect and the ability for somebody to, be able to process or methylate nutrients. But as I said, they see anecdotally pre and post COVID and what that looks like from people that they didn't used to see these things. And I don't know about your experience, but I've experienced that before COVID, most people felt pretty good, not terrible, not bad. But since COVID, there seems to have been an increase of people just not feeling good, fatigued, whether they had COVID identified, tested for it, or they didn't. And I don't know if we can, we could explain that away to people that have been vaccinated that actually expose people that have not been vaccinated to that virus and getting those spike proteins in them, because there's a lot of theories that say that happens. But there's no question that a lot of people compared to 6, 7 years ago seem to be dealing with more cellular inefficiencies than they have since COVID. So I think there's something to it, but they just haven't identified exactly yet what it is. But I suppose that's probably going to come up. Someone's going to figure out the mechanism at some point, in the near future, because I know they're still looking at it.
Yeah, and there's so many factors, right, with social isolation and weight gain and, a lot. There's so many factors that would add up to why there's more chronic inflammation and all the diseases of chronic inflammation in the past 5, 6 years, especially if we study the charts around chronic inflammatory disease over the last 100 years and see that it's just on a steady incline in general. So as people are adding 2-3 medications on top of chronic inflammation, we're seeing such a load on the physiology in general that, again, people aren't weight creep year after year, after year after year. Things are just going to get worse in terms of how they feel in a 5-year period.
No question. But what I tell my patients, we have two choices. We're either going to invest in the incline of our health, or we're going to be managing the decline. And it's a choice. And our current model is just managing the decline, which is, after 40, it's all downhill, and all those sayings that, well, I'm over 40, so I expect to have these certain things. I'm not going to feel the same. However, because of the information out there on the internet, and then being able to connect with professionals that might not be in your hometown, that have information that if you choose to invest and learn and educate yourself, you can be a better, influence on your own health, because, you're the one that walks around in that body every day, Cate. I'm walking around in mine. So what you and I do on a daily basis for ourselves is going to have a much greater effect than any professional can. That being said, arming yourself with information to know how lifestyle changes specific to you, your genetics, the way your body functions, can really have a great impact. And, I also say, this modern or contemporary world it's warring against us. There's a war out on our environment every day against us. And we have to try to minimize the damage and fortify the deficiencies to let our bodies do its best work. Our bodies have, survived for centuries because inherently it has everything it needs to survive. But the natural world that we lived in, 100, 200, 300 years ago is not the same world that most of us are living in today, at least in the city and the suburbs. So we're up against so much more from a health standpoint.
Yeah, amen to that. And it's the chemical load of pharmaceuticals and vaccinations and all that. Like it's endless. So if we talk about the things that are actually, we know work for everyone, you mentioned that you're on the carnivore diet, have been for a few years. We both, I think, on our websites have cryotherapy and other adversity habits. In the tradition that my background is in is Ayurvedic medicine, and yoga and fasting has always been a huge part of those traditions, both for disease prevention, for disease treatment, and also for meaning and purpose, right? For these larger spiritual quests that are directly linked to mental, emotional, and physical health. So as we see these things that are basically free, it's easy to get cold, especially if you live in a colder climate. It's easy to not eat if you're around other people that understand that. And it's easy to pare down the diet into things that are not creating an inflammatory response, just, like going carnivore. How do you see the difference in that compared to doing these highly specialized tests? If we, what I mean? If at the end of the road, it's wow, these similar adversity habits really work for almost everybody, except for the extremely convalescing or people that are in an acute inflammatory state. How do you kind of couple those two things, where one is very, for some people out of reach financially in terms of the testing, or very individualized and specific. And on the other side, we have this sort of it's free, it works for everyone.
Yeah. So the easiest answer is what, nature has provided for us. We have this environment that was created and we've been living in for, again, centuries and centuries, and it's been very supportive of us. More recently, it's been, known this whole concept of grounding and what that actually means. It means that we're getting the Earth's low-level electromagnetic pulse to help restore every day our low-level electromagnetic pulse in our bodies. We're both biophysical entities, our bodies and the Earth. So we've been relying on the Earth for centuries to keep those plus and minus charges going in the proper balance, because it's responsible for how we bring nutrients into our cells through the membranes, how we dispose waste products from cell metabolism, how our red blood cells carry oxygen from our lungs to our tissues, how our red blood cells themselves exist in the bloodstream. They're supposed to be nice and big discs and negatively charged, so they repel each other as they go through the bloodstream. But all this electricity and wireless internet and 5G and all that around us in our devices emit these high frequency electromagnetic fields that interrupt our normal functioning, causes our red blood cells to clump together, and they do not carry oxygen very well when it comes to that. So just the earth support on the outside getting, not on the cement, because we all live on concrete, slabs pretty much, and we wear rubber soles, many of us. So we're losing that from the earth. So unless we're really getting our feet on the ground, the beach or the grass or the dirt every day, we're not getting the earth's pulse. And that's a really important thing. And so again, looking to nature that way, getting out in fresh air, not just being in the environment inside, all day long, but actually getting some fresh air and going to do some breathing techniques to really make sure you upgrade your oxygen intake, because oxygen drives so much of what we create, our ATP energy in our, bloods in our cells, all of our cells. And so getting enough oxygen is paramount, because most people think, oh, I'm breathing, I'm fine. Not fine. There's so much more oxygen you can be breathing in and getting it so much more to your tissues and your distal tissues that can get your ATP production up 16 times, where many people are walking around at only like 2 horsepower when they're supposed to be at 36 horsepower. It's not horsepower, but that's the idea. But it is that much more. And then getting sunlight, because like the plants and the trees and the grass grow from photosynthesis from sunlight, our cells have the ability to absorb light in the part of our cells that make energy, the mitochondria. And in absorbing that light, it upgrades ATP production because of how it works on what's called the electron transport system. So the earth, the air, and the sun, light, are 3 things in nature that nobody has to pay for, that they can very much use on a daily basis to just get that exposure, which I guarantee if people did it every day for a week and they hadn't been doing it, they're going to notice a change. It's, most people, when they go to the beach, they feel good. They don't know why they feel so good going to the beach. It's not just the relaxation or the fun in the sun. There's more to it than that physiologically. The other thing is, you mentioned cold therapy. I'm a big proponent of what, we call stress adaptation. The more we can stress our bodies in various ways, physiologically, physically, mechanically, our body's innate ability to adapt to that will get us stronger. When we don't push ourselves and we make our lives more and more convenient, we're losing quality of life that way. We need to always be in a motion of stressing our bodies for adaptation so it can keep growing. Because, you don't have to just figure that after 40, you're just going to kind of exist. But why can't we get stronger as we go along? Why can't we get more healthy as we go along? Well, we can if we stress our bodies and tap into its innate ability to adapt to that stress and become more effective and efficient and stronger against those stressors. So that cold therapy is one way to do it physiologically. There's so many benefits that we get from cold exposure: immune boosting, growth hormone boosting, other hormone boosting, metabolic rates going way up, getting rid of some white fat and replacing it with brown fat, which has much more metabolic energy to deliver to somebody. So that contrast in going from those regular temperatures to cold and creating that shock gives us so many great benefits. And the other thing that I think is very important, and a lot of people don't realize, is that we talk about hydration. Most people that I've spoken to, when you hear hydration, they think about how much water they're drinking. But they don't realize that hydration really is most important inside the cells, and water can't get in there unless you have the proper electrolyte balance. That's why supplying the right electrolytes along with your water is paramount to getting that water where it belongs, again, inside the cell, so that cell can function. So those main things, and you can do it with normal mineral salt, sea salt, to add it to your water every day, first thing in the morning. And like you said, if you live in a cold climate, you can do that. We live in South Florida, so a lot of people now have cold plunges. We were using whole body cryotherapy, but the trend has gone to the water side. So there's many places that have sprang up that have contrast with infrared sauna and then cold therapy. And many people have just gotten them at their houses. So I would say those things are things that are reachable for people, that are very low cost, that they can start making those changes, because it is good for everybody. Like you said, it doesn't look at their genetics and the individuality. It looks at the similarity that we all share in common.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that we've really focused on in Club Thrive, is that adversity habits, that these positive stressors, they work for everyone and they're usually free, right? So there's not this barrier, this elitist medicine that can really come up around, the peak performance community. It's interesting, in a lot of what you said, it's built in, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it's like basically built into the core principles in yoga. So when we look to these ancient medicine traditions, whether it's from First Peoples from the East or the West or the North or the South, we find that like humans, none of this information is new. Like we've known this, we have it documented from thousands of years. So one of the words in yoga for these habits of doing hard things is called tapas. And it's one of there's in the Eightfold Path of Yoga, the first two rungs on the ladder. The first one is the yamas, which are social restraints, which is like how you show up with other people, so that we're actually tribal. We're tribal first in who we are, that it's not just us, but it's our genetics, it's our relationships, it's the people around us. We don't survive on our own. And then the second is personal observances. And so the third rung, or on the second rung of the ladder, there's these 5 step downs, and one of them is tapas. And tapas very much is this strive to do hard things. And what's fascinating to me about the yogic path, which I don't think a lot of people really know, especially in modern culture, is that the yogic path for people is actually more of like the 40, 50 years up path. It's like you actually, after you kind of got through some of the personal development phase of life, and then who you are in the world or who you are in the marketplace time of life, by the time you hit midlife, you're starting to make this physiological transition where in Ayurvedic medicine, we have different language around it, but basically where the juiciness, which we have more sophisticated terms for, both in terms of the immune system, but also in terms of just the actual hydration within the tissue, that juicy phase of life, this juicy, regenerative, youthful phase of life, is transitioning into the drier phase of life. And in that transition is reflection. Is this like, oh, now the stakes are higher. Now my habits, the good habits that are compounding, I'm seeing the differential between having these and the people that don't have these habits. But then also I'm noticing that I'll take the hit if I'm out of alignment with what I know to be true. So part of that second rung of the ladder of this eightfold path of yoga, I mentioned it has 5 parts. One of them is this doing hard things that make us feel better in the long run. But the next part of that is self-study. So we have increased ability as we're aging to notice what's working and what's not working, because we're less distracted by the outer world. We're less distracted by all the things that we are to other people out there. And we're more aware of, when I do this, that happens. So we're able to actually adjust and move our own needle. And I feel like this part of evolutionary physiology or something like that is less understood in the West than it is in other systems of medicine, where we have some of these principles that have been time tested, and not time tested over the last research of the last 10 years, but time tested over thousands of years, where these teachings have been carried from one generation to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation, over hundreds of generations. And we have these ways of articulating that are not really well understood by, not only like the average Westerner, but also by the medical professionals and the wellness professionals. Some of these increased faculties that we have as we have more revolutions around the sun, particularly after we've passed that midlife horizon. And the other thing I want to mention in this is the lift that we get from doing hard things together. And this is why the club model is so, what we've landed on both at Club Thrive and also at Wellness Pro Academy, is it's easier to do the harder things together and to actually grow traction at home with that, with the people in our everyday life that might not be a wellness leader to us, but we might actually be the wellness leader to them in our households or in our family gatherings or in our, friendships in local communities, that we might be the wellness inspiration for them. And that sense of purpose and meaning that comes from how important it is to do the hard things together becomes increasingly important, especially as we realize that our habits aren't our own. Right? Our habits they're in the collective. So the battle that you were talking about previously in terms of just the toxic load that's on us as Westerners or as mainstream Americans, or even as, biohackers in a world of peak performance, that within that, right, within that, like there's such an ability to actually be in these fairly counterculture peak performance habits when we're doing it together. And then we're able to we're able to normalize, right? Because our habits are not our own. So if our habits are communal or collective, we're able to normalize things that are just not normal out there. And when we do that, we actually have more intimacy and connection. We're actually back into that first rung of the ladder with how are we showing up together? What are we doing together? What foods are we celebrating with together? What is normal in our household? And I just find so much power in that.
Yeah, so as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, first of all, in the Western world, we've been really kind of directed by corporate, medicine, corporate food, and all those things in terms of how is it, 100 years ago, people were still eating differently and didn't have all the processed stuff, and they were still walking more and moving more, and very physically active, both, a woman that was working in the home and had physical chores to do, as well as the man that was working outside the home, and the children that would, learn from the dad, learn from the mom. That's how they learned how to, become adults. And we've lost that because, at least in this country, the corporations have been guiding what our quote unquote, normal is, that you keep using that word, normal. And what seems to be fringe now through the biohacking community is really tapping into the way we used to live for so many years, and basically is responsible for our continued existence. Because if we had modernism centuries ago, I don't think we'd be here anymore, because our bodies wouldn't have survived. Could you imagine taking somebody from this day and age and thrusting them back 200 years ago? They wouldn't last a week because of the requirements of the average person. Now, that being said, people that are biohackers or high performance, they would at least have the wherewithal. If they didn't have the education on what to do, they would have the physicality to be able to do it, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, if that's how they've been, working now to try to tap into that ancient way of living that we've, all but lost because of the modern world that we're, living in. But the other thing is, I think about, the community thing, which, I mean, I could think of right off the top of my head, and as a practitioner, what I saw and how I kind of tapped into understanding the mentalities back in the early teens, mid-teens of this century. CrossFit became such a huge thing, and I believe the biggest thing that got people in was, number one, the community they built around, the stress that they were putting against themselves, and the camaraderie. They even had their own lingo. They created a whole glossary of new terms that everyone had to, learn. The WOD, the workout of the day. Scaling, can't do exactly what the workout's calling for. I'm going to scale back a little bit. All these things, and created a camaraderie in a performance-based workout that there's no mirrors. It's not about looking pretty in the mirror. It's about performing and pushing each other to get more work done in less time. So the stimulation and that adaptation was only as good as the community around you, because there's a big difference between trying to do that on your own versus having, a dozen people around you trying to get it done too. So I see that. Now, of course, it's pickleball. Pickleball is the first thing that I've seen that crosses so many generations, where you could have a grandparent, a child, and a grandchild all on the same court, regardless of level of capability and athleticism, and the community that brings about all that stuff. This love for this sport, is something that I'd never seen in any sport, even CrossFit. CrossFit was more of a niche. You're not going to get grandparents and parents and grandchildren going to CrossFit. Very, very few and far between if you do. However, with pickleball, it's universal, and the people that love it, they love each other. I have a patient that's the general manager of a 9-court indoor court here in South Florida, which is very busy, because when it's too hot to play, people play inside. And so he has told me that countless couples that had become empty nesters had started and take clinic with him and learned pickleball, and said it saved their marriage, because all of a sudden they spent all their time bringing up kids, and they weren't spending enough time together. And they, you look at each other, 30 years later, like, all right, what are we doing now? Like, what do we have in common? And pickleball has actually saved so many marriages because of the thing that brought the two together. They both have a love for the game, and the community they now start building around it. And it becomes so much a part of their social life, and I think emotional and spiritual support. as well. I've never seen it like this in a phenomenon, but I see it with so many people because I treat a lot of people that have the injuries, because a lot of weekend warriors are going out and playing pickleball because, you know, they want to play with their grandkids and they get hurt. But I've never seen something so important to people on all those levels like you're speaking about. So I think
Mhm.
there's so much merit in terms of that community feeling and how much that drives somebody's ability to do those hard things and get past them, and, you know, patting each other on the back when you do, and you're all moving ahead. You know, you're investing in a future of, you know, vigor and resilience instead of, well, the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. The shared experience is huge. In my book on Inflamed, there's a chapter on commune as a primal habit, and like why that really matters for anyone who's on an anti-aging track, or wanting purpose and meaning in their life track, or just better health. And I think a lot of what, you know, if we look at the phenomenon of pickleball, I have a intergenerational family of pickleball players, so I can relate directly on that one. And it's like, what are the things that we used to do together? It's like, well, we used to have to harvest together. We used to plant together. We used to have all of these shared experiences, preparing meals together, right? I'm not just taking that stuff out of the box at Costco and putting in the oven. We had these shared experiences together. And that's what, to me, is like such a huge, like when we get, like, where does that intersect with some of these more, you know, peak performance, elite testing and that? It's like, there's this incredible holistic experience of being a whole human again, where we can have the best of personalized medicine, with not just it being all about us and my genetics and my DNA and my methylization, but like, wow, like what are the things that make a huge difference in how much purpose, connection, community also impacts how healthy we are and how great we feel every day.
So that's a great point. And, you know, the blue zones that we have around the world, when they were first looking at to see the age of a lot of these people in these villages where they, you know, were living, you know, at first they thought it was diet related, but then as they, you know, went around the globe, there were different diets. The two things that were the biggest on that longevity scale was, number one, community, and having that constant daily, you know, communal feeling and exposure and sharing and all the things that we do, and whether they were walking. The other thing was walking, and usually not on flat ground, but on
Right.
mountains, that really get somebody to, you know, push their cardiovascular, but it becomes an activity of daily living when you live in those geographic locations. So you're already on a daily basis in terms of how your body is functioning and moving through space, is already doing it against a certain level of resistance that just builds constant resilience. Again, the more convenient we are in our lives, the more easy things are for us, the more unhealthy we get. So
Yeah.
those two things were the top two things, was the physical part of it and the community part of it too, which fed all the things that needed to give somebody purpose to keep going. Some, you know, in isolation, I don't think we can really have a lot of longevity by ourselves, you know, left to our own devices. But in that community, you know, there's so much that it brings, and it's really interesting because I didn't realize that you were doing it to that level. But I think that makes so much sense. And this is one of the great things about having technology to reach so many people and create that community, you know, not just on a local level, but, you know, globally, really, which just makes so much sense. And I really applaud you for putting that together.
Thanks. Yeah, and just shout out to my friend Elise Marie Collins, who wrote Super Agers, where she looked at the research across all the blue zones. And there's a few podcasts on the yogahealer.com site for those looking for that. But yeah, I love that research on uneven ground. I think about that all the time with my aging parents, and even just like taking them a little bit off trail, like just, you know, and how much the whole brain rewires into the feet, and what's actually happening there, where we need the unpredictable, right? We need variance, we need novelty, we need that off the beaten track experience happening. Well, I know we could go into red light, we could talk about all sorts of things, but I know we've got to wrap up, and it's just been great. So if they want to do some of the testing with you, they go to physicalevidencechiropractic.com, and they can click on, they can just click through the site. Anything else that you'd like to inform listeners about?
Yeah, to make it easy, I created a URL that'll take them right to a form fill. It's physicalevidenceconnect.com. physicalevidenceconnect.com. You can put in your information, how to contact you, and there's also a drop-down menu to see, you know, one of the particular areas of interest you have, and then there's a box where you can customize and just type out. That's been the most effective way for people to reach me. I look at it every day, and I'm able to reach out and schedule things to have conversations, and see what you're interested in, see what it is that I can do to offer you this information so you can become more informed as an individual about yourself, really, and how you can really run with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Lipman. It was a pleasure to get to know your expertise.
Likewise. Thank you, Cate. Appreciate you.